And what motivated you to go for CFA? Level 3 is generally considered to be the most challenging.
Well, I thought no more studies, but
Yeah.
alas, he said to me that, oh, babe, you're going into finance, you'll need to do the CFA.
That must be Guinness Book of World Record. Your name is gonna go in there. Let's talk about ROI.
I'd say the biggest tip I could say is you have to be brutally honest with yourself.
Did you use ChatGPT or not?
No,
it did not exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to Leaders Talk. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Sultan Al Kuwari, an inspiring investment professional and a CFA charter holder. Sultan has achieved a remarkable feat of completing the CFA exams in just 16 months. Yes, only 16 months. And today he's here to share with us his story, his study strategies, and his journey. So let's dive in. Sultan, welcome to podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So let's begin, Sultan. Before we get into the CFA grind, let's just rewind a bit, and we'd like to understand, and I think our viewers would like to understand more about your academic background, your experience, and what actually inspired you to go for the CFA.
Sure. So I went to the University of Oxford. I studied economics and management.
Mm-hmm.
However, within those courses, I did take a module in finance and accounting. So
Right.
I did have some finance and accounting background, but
Okay.
just so people don't worry that, there were many colleagues of mine who had no finance or accounting background. And if anything, actually, having studied economics, I actually found there were times when it actually hindered me rather than helped me with the economics and CFA. So just as a disclaimer to people, not to worry if you don't have that background. But I certainly did, but it's not a prerequisite by any means.
Okay, and what motivated you to go for CFA?
To be perfectly honest, I can tell you a funny story. So I was at my graduation ceremony in September 2021, and I was very happy because, I felt that was the end of my academic career. I was very much ready to begin the world of work.
Okay.
And I remember a friend saying to me at the time,
No more
but-
studies.
yeah, well, I thought no more studies, but
Yeah.
alas, he said to me that, oh, babe, you're going into finance, you'll need to do the CFA. And I remember saying to him at the time, what is the CFA?
Yeah.
And then quite funnily, about a week later, because I was doing my interviews for QIA, they then mentioned that as part of the graduate program for an apprentice at QIA, you would study for the CFA level 1. And it's actually a prerequisite for becoming a formal employee at QIA. So that's essentially how I was introduced in the CFA. So actually less than a month after that graduation ceremony, I was with yourself studying for CFA level 1.
Correct. Okay. So, you took on a very pretty intense challenge of going for all the 3 levels back to back and racing through the CFA exam. So what gave you that confidence and motivation to keep going right up one after another?
I think it certainly helped that, because I came straight from university, I was still in the mode of studying.
Okay.
And so I almost felt to myself that it was almost as if I hadn't left university, that I'm still studying. And that's very important because I know I'm thinking myself now a few years afterwards, I think it will be very difficult to pick it up again. And so I certainly would recommend people. Now, I understand case by case, sometimes this isn't possible, but if you have the opportunity to try to have as small a gap as possible between the levels, because it really does help having that continuity, that studying continuity, the academic continuity. Whereas once you get back into the world of work, it's difficult to restart essentially that process.
And I often tell candidates, especially those who have just passed out of university, that what we generally observe is that the success rate with those who have just recently passed is a lot higher. That's because they're already used to studying, and also they know how to approach the studies versus those who have already studied and have had a gap in terms of academic studies. So that's very interesting to know. And again, I'm sure with every learner during the journey, there'll be times where you felt your motivation was a bit low or you needed. How did you handle that?
Well, one thing I felt is that, and this is a very important point, is that there is such thing as overstudying. So given the fact that if you're doing like me back to back to back, there will come a time when you are fed up of studying. That's natural. It'll happen to everyone. But then the important thing to do is to make sure you have something else to do. So don't think that, if you're studying CFA, that's all you have in your life. Obviously, that has to be a major focus of your life, but it's very important to have other pursuits, and ideally non-work related pursuits. So it could be as simple as, having a group of friends that you can go and meet. It could be ideally something physical. So, a sporting activity, just to take your mind off it because, people, I'm sure we'll get onto this later about how many hours you study. But I'm always someone who I prefer looking at outputs rather than inputs. So rather than thinking to myself, okay, today I have to do 10 hours study, it's far better to do 5 hours of proper work rather than just do 10 hours, but know in yourself that, after the first 4 hours, you're not taking anything in.
All right, that's very interesting to know. I think, as you rightly mentioned about the hours, every student of CFA would be eager to know, how was your daily routine like? How did you spend your day when it came to studying for each of the level? How much time were you actually dedicating towards the study? I mean, even I get asked the same question, how many hours should I actually be studying in the week? And as you rightly said, I give the same response, saying that it shouldn't be a number of hours, but rather you should judge yourself based on your weekly target, what you actually had to achieve. Did you actually achieve that or not? Because at times some topics are easier and they'll take you less time, and other topics you might actually find difficult.
Well, that's a very good point. So how I often try to split it was, so what I would try to do is to complete a subtopic a day, ideally, or maybe even 2 or 3 days, but meaning that would then determine how long I would spend. So if it's a topic that's very easy, I could do that maybe even only an hour. But a much more difficult one, it could take 4 to 5 hours. And so that's why I said, rigidly having, okay, Monday I'm going to do 2 hours, Tuesday 3 hours, Wednesday 4. It doesn't work like that. You have to be more flexible, and it has to be related to also your own strengths, because lots of people have come to ask me and said, okay, how long did you spend on fixed income? How long did you spend on derivatives? I said, but what I say won't be relevant to you, because you might really enjoy derivatives. You might be very good at fixed income. So it really has to be tailored to each individual.
What was your study strategy exactly like? Did you attend training? Did you watch videos? Did you rely on reading the textbook? Where did you practice from? Just tell us a little bit about.
So level 1 was a bit different, because in level 1, I was lucky enough that, through my work, we had daily sessions from morning to afternoon with yourself. So that made level 1 a lot easier in that sense. And then what I do to complement that would be to read the textbooks from Kaplan and also the CFA notes. Level 2 and 3 was a bit more challenging, because whilst I did attend your sessions, rather than being every day, they were 2 sessions of 3 hours a week. So of it 3 hours at each time. So obviously you can't cover as much. So in those cases, what I would generally do as the first introduction of a topic would be to watch videos. Why I like videos particularly is I find that, just reading through the content, it very quickly becomes dry, and that's why I'll be honest to people, even you don't have to be someone who absolutely, I know very few people who will absolutely love reading finance texts, page after page after page.
Yeah, it's
Whereas
3,000 plus pages.
Exactly. No one can do that.
Yeah.
So at least with a video, you get the most important content. And because it's interactive, it's something that personally for me at least, it just makes it easier to digest, easier to absorb. And then also it's bite-sized. A lot of the videos might be 10 minutes long, 20 minutes long, or even if they're longer, you can always split them up, etc., etc. So I'd always do that to get grounding in the topic. And then after that, I would, as soon as possible, start doing questions. Because I always find that by doing questions, that shows you where you need to focus on more. Because then by doing questions, you might find that there's an area of that topic that you know very well. So you don't need to focus more on it. But then if there's an area you don't, that's when you'd go into more detail and read, say, the CFA text. Because, for example, the prep providers, they will obviously give a more concise reading of the text. And in some cases, that's enough if it's something that you're good at.
Yes.
But in other cases, you need to go back to the CFA. So that's certainly dependent on the topic and your own strengths and weaknesses.
So you mentioned that you've been doing lots of practice along the way. I get asked a question sometimes that should I be doing practice? Or some candidates actually like to practice all the way to the end. They just leave it towards the end. What was your approach like, and what did you find beneficial?
So what I would generally do is be consistent in the sense practice the same amount, more or less, for every topic, with the exception of, certain sub areas of topics I would practice more or less depending on my own strengths. But then when I would get to then this phase of doing mock exams, after the mock exams, I would then go back through all the topics, see which ones I did well and which ones I didn't. And then the ones that I was consistently not doing as well on, then I would go back to do more questions and answers on those specific topics.
Okay, did you come across challenge of this feeling that you're forgetting the stuff? I mean, this is again a common situation that a lot of CFA candidates, due to the vast amount of material, actually face, is that after a while, after 3-4 weeks, when they're learning constantly something new knowledge, they feel like they're forgetting the older material. So did you experience this, and how did you address it?
I mean, first of all, I have to say, of course, like, I like to think of myself, I have a very good memory, like better than a lot, and I'm very lucky to have that. But even me, like, no one can remember all that content.
Exactly.
It's impossible. So don't like, beat yourself up or feel bad because you
It's very natural.
forget it. It's natural. You could create your own. Is they have a checkpoint, like they call them like quizzes or almost mini exams. So rather than being like a full mock, there'll be like a mock essentially on, say, a third of the content.
Yeah.
And the why that's useful is because then
Mini mocks.
because then you're going back on content that you've learned in the last month. So it's just a way of refreshing and seeing, okay, I did this 4 or 5 weeks ago, but is it still there, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's why also, on that first run through the material, it's very important that, you're focused, because if not, it can be very easy to get something into your short-term memory and remember it the next day. But what you need that in your long-term memory. So you're
Correct.
remembering it, months down the line.
And often when I get asked this question, I often say like the candidates should be following a spaced repetition strategy. But then the question is, how do they revise? Because do they have to rewatch all the detailed lectures? So what we have recently introduced, which has benefited all the learners a great deal, is short bite-sized revision videos, which is like a crash course. So we take a more proactive approach to now revision, as opposed to revising close to the exam, like in the penultimate month, right before the exam. What I tell them is, once you've attended a lecture, right after that, you should be watching the revision video, because it's just a short. I mean, it's kind of like an investment.
No, of course.
So you repeat it right after, and then after a while, maybe over the weekend, repeat the videos again, the revision videos again. And because they've repeated it, then now they would remember it for a longer period of time. Because in CFA, it's not only about understanding content. You also need to retain that vast amount of content, and to be able to retain, it's gigantic. It's a lot. So to be able to retain it, you need to repeat, besides doing a lot of practice. So,
and that's why I go back to what I said about like maintaining that academic discipline. So what helped me is that because I came straight from university, that I was already used to that, because obviously at university and then previously at school, that's what you do. You learn content and then you have to then essentially relearn it for an exam. And so, CFA is the same in that sense, essentially.
So what worked for you? Studying early in the morning, or studying late after work, or throughout the day? What was your typical routine like?
The ideal time to study, and I think most people will be similar in this, is in the morning, because that's, when you're fresh and when your mind will be its most alert. But, realistically, and the same was for me, that's often not possible. Like level 1 was different, but level 2 and 3, I was, I had my job. And so, even though I was lucky, I had an agreement with my line manager that I was given allocated some time. That time would often be later in the day. So, I just didn't have the opportunity to do morning work. But then what I would recommend people to do, and, this may be hard initially, is that in the weekends, try to focus on working mornings and the weekends. Because then also I think that helps, because then you're working when your brain's most active, and then you can still have, you can still do whatever
that's
you enjoy
with
in
some
the
time for yourself personally as
Exactly.
well.
I mean, realistically, for most people who are working, which most people will be, you will end up having to do some nighttime sessions. What I try to do, if possible, I mean, it's not always possible, is that at the nighttime sessions, to either do content that I knew I was good at, or kind of reviewing content. So ideally not starting a brand new topic that I knew was difficult at like 8, 9 o'clock at night. Because at least for me personally, I just know that's not the best time to absorb new information.
I think that's very interesting as well. And often when I speak to all the candidates, I tell them that you need to strike balance between work, life, and study.
Yes.
So yes, in order to sustain studying for an extensive period of time, let's say for about 6 months alongside work, you need to have a little bit of time for yourself as well, personally, in order to keep studying. So that's
because I say the timing may seem like 60 months seems very short, but when you're actually in there, it is actually long. And so, you may think to yourself, oh, I can keep going for 6 months, but realistically, you can't go full out for 6 months. So you have to balance. There'll have to be times when, you'll do more or less work. Another anecdote I can actually say is that, so when I was studying for level 3, it coincided with the FIFA World Cup. And people who know me will know me. I'm an absolute football lover. I went to 33 World Cup matches. Well, I can say for a whole month, I did
33 matches.
Yes, I actually broke a previous world record. So
that must be Guinness Book of World Record. Your name is gonna go in there.
I'll be honest. Like I didn't do any CFA for a whole month. But like I knew prior and after that I was going to do that. So I made sure I worked really hard before and then really hard after.
So you rewarded yourself.
Exactly. And so what I'm meaning is that, I still passed. So this notion that, if you're studying for CFA, you can't have any social life. It's not true. You can, you just have to be disciplined, essentially. I'd say discipline is the most important.
Absolutely. Exactly. And I often tell candidates, if you are disciplined, half the job is done.
Exactly.
Half the job is done. So, the CFA Institute recommends around 300 to 350 hours per level. I mean, let's be honest.
Yes.
Did you clock in those hours or did you exceed them?
If I'm being honest, I probably clocked in around those hours, roughly. But then going back to what I said before, as I said, I don't think simply measuring it by hours is the correct way to do it. Because as I said, you could theoretically spend 5 hours just staring at a book, but you're not taking anything in. Or you could spend 1 hour being really, really focused and actually benefit a lot from that 1 hour.
And I do agree as well as an instructor. I mean, like a person with an average background or a little bit of finance background, for them, maybe 300 to 350 hours would be ideal or okay. But again, with other learners who don't have a background, perhaps they might have to put in more, or those with a very relevant academic background might have to actually clock in less. So yes,
well, also, it was kind of difficult for me because obviously, I had the ability to put in those numbers. So, maybe I could have done 250 and still pass, but I'm, no one's going to put it out to chance. So I think you should always try and do more if you can, but then at the same time, don't be worried if you haven't hit a certain number.
Correct. Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So since you have passed level 3 as well on your first attempt, level 3 is generally considered to be the most challenging, and as the essay type specifically is considered to be the most challenging. So do you have any tips for candidates on how to approach this section of the level 3 exam?
I'd say the biggest tip I could say is you have to be brutally honest with yourself. So because the differences with the other levels and with the other part of level 3 is it's right or wrong. It's A, B, or C. So there's no discrepancy. There's nothing up for debate.
Correct. Yeah.
But the problem with the part of level 3 is that there are obviously suggested answers. And the question you always have to ask yourself is like, oh, well, I was kind of there. I'm half right. Should I be harsh on myself? Should I be generous? And I would always say, even if it might cause short-term pain, always be harsh on yourself. Because I remember when I was first marking these papers, and I just as an experiment, I thought it was good to see. So I did the exact same paper. I did one where I was very generous to myself and one where I was very harsh. Like the gap was literally from, I think, 90% to 50%.
Wow.
So meaning, like I did that deliberately as an extreme, but meaning it just shows that depending how you view your answer is important. So I think it's far better to be harsh initially, and then it will really make you focus on, rather than just saying, oh, well, I've kind of got the gist, roughly what they say. You need to be very focused and ensure 100% you've got the terminology they're using, because what you don't want to happen is that, you've got something similar to the answer, but you don't get the credit because you're not using the exact correct, terminology, or you're not writing in the way they want it.
I think that's a very important tip that you have given out to this level 3 candidates, that you should be tough on yourself when grading your own mocks or your tests.
And I admit it can be difficult because, naturally you'll probably have friends who are doing it, and people who are competitive, they'll often say, oh, what did you get? What did but that's where you have to think like, oh, he might say he got X, but if you know that he's been very generous to himself, at the end of the day, he'll be the loser and you'll be the winner in the long run. So
I'm sure some candidates would want to know, did you use ChatGPT or not? But
no,
it did not exist.
Yeah, exactly. It's so long ago that it hadn't become mainstream then. So.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
All right. So, finally, all this struggle is for a reason.
Yes.
So I guess this is the most awaited question. Let's talk about ROI. So how has earning the CFA charter actually impacted your career so far? has it opened any doors, built any opportunities?
No, it's certainly been highly beneficial. I know where I work at Qatar Investment Authority, they view it very highly. They certainly view it as, if they're looking at promotions or putting you in new positions, it's certainly something they take into consideration. I believe this is true across the entire financial industry. I have friends, colleagues in other areas, so in banking, insurance, etc. And I know in all these fields, particularly in Qatar, it's certainly something that is viewed highly. And I'd say it's viewed highly for two reasons. So obviously, first and foremost, it's for the content. If I think Mark Meldrum, who's well known, he said that, there's no better manual or handbook for what finance is about and what finance practitioners do than the CFA. And it really does give you a really comprehensive, a brilliant background on everything there is in the world of finance. So that's obviously the primary reason. But I think the secondary reason, and perhaps even more importantly than the primary reason, is the signaling that it shows. Because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of discipline and self-awareness, but also self-motivation to do all of that studying whilst you're working. It's easy when, you're at school and everyone else is studying, you have to study to get study. But when, you've got other responsibilities, I myself am lucky that, because I know I don't have family, but there'll be other people who, have a family, have other commitments. So when you've got those life commitments, you've got work commitments, you've got all those other things in your life, essentially, it takes a lot of perseverance to go through a CFA. And I know that around the world, so like say back in the UK, for example, that is almost valued even more than the actual content you've learned, because it really is a show of your character and it shows your determination.
And then CFA trains you to build that character besides the content, actually.
Exactly.
And that's what employers really appreciate and recognize, as you rightly said, the fact that you're managing such a big, gigantic certification or studying for it and succeeding in it, despite of having all those other commitments.
So one thing I would say also with CFA is it's a very good level. Like obviously, if you've had a background in finance, that will help you, but it's not, as I've said before, like that doesn't preclude others who don't. And also, no matter how intelligent or how good a memory you have, because of the amount of content, it's not something that even the most intelligent person in the world, like they couldn't spend 100 hours and pass. It's something that everyone, no matter who you are, has to put in those hours. And so that's why I really just show it's a group, like, at least, if I was putting myself in the shoes of an employer, I would be very impressed just the fact that someone has taken the time to do that, because it is a very big commitment.
Absolutely. And that's a really an amazing point that you've actually mentioned. So now we're going to kickstart a very interesting round, which is what we call the rapid fire round. So you have to answer with the first word that actually comes to your mind. The toughest CFA level?
2.
Level 2?
Yes.
Interesting. Morning or night study sessions?
Morning.
Morning. Great. Similar.
Although night often is all you can do. So yeah, I know that's more than one word.
I think you've already mentioned that during your conversation, but let me ask you again. Books or videos?
Videos.
Videos. Number of mock exams?
I'd say as many as you can. So I generally did about 6.
All right. Okay, great.
6 to 8.
And now CFA offers, like in level 1, about 8 mock exams. They've started offering more.
Yeah, so they didn't offer that when I was doing it, but I would certainly highly recommend to anyone doing it to do as many mock exams.
Exactly. Because they're very exam representative.
Because also that's the closest you can get to what you're doing on the actual day. And that's the best way of seeing what are your true strengths and weaknesses. Because, you can be someone who you do really well when you're kind of practicing just that topic, but then can you perform under pressure when it's all the topics put together and, you've got time pressure and it's just a completely different environment.
Yeah. And what we have also started recently is a simulated mock exam. So since we have a designated lab where we conduct exams, so we've started introducing basically a simulated mock exam where we bring all the candidates to come and actually attempt a mock exam timed under examination conditions.
You said earlier what I'd do differently. I wish I could have done that, because I think that is something else that's very useful, because, obviously nothing can be completely like the day, but that it's very important to have something that as best as possible can mimic what the experience will be like on the actual day. Because for a lot of people, I know people who sadly didn't pass on the first attempt, and I know that they had the ability to, but it was just, they got nervous on the day.
Exactly, exam related.
Exactly. And so if you can just get used to just even small things, like I know for me personally, small things like the logistics of the exam might make me a bit more nervous, and things like, making sure I'll get there on time, making sure I brought everything with me. And so just by having that facility, that would really help.
I mean, and I would like to share my own experience. I did a CIPM course and I sat the exam. So I had to be a student, go to the examination venue and do the exam. And the day when I had the exam, I wasn't feeling well. So I had fever. And what I was told by another candidate who had done CFA, that they were not allowed to carry water bottle into the examination room. While when I went in, others were actually carrying water bottle. Now I was already sweating and I am sick. While I started the exam, I really felt if I should have carried it. So I think when we just recently started doing it for the very first batch we have done it, it was really amazing because they got to see what they would experience in the exam. They got to see the positives, the negatives, the exam-related stress, and a lot of them actually learned what they need to do before the actual exam. So instead of just being suddenly exposed to it in the actual exam.
And of course, for me, practice makes perfect. So like level 2 and 3 was, from that perspective, easier than level 1 because the novelty's kind of gone out of it. You're used to the center where it is. You're used to just everything.
Correct. So amazing. The subject that you dreaded the most?
Fixed income.
Fixed income.
Probably just because it's one of probably the only subject I had no background in initially. So at least to begin with, it just felt a bit different.
I think that's a typical case. Many finance candidates are more exposed to or aware of equity investments as opposed to fixed income. So fuel, coffee or energy drinks or nothing?
I know it's supposed to be one word, but this is one word, neither. I just drink water.
All right. Okay, great. I think that's a very rare exception.
Yes, I know I'm very rare for that. But
okay, CFA in 16 months, luck or strategy?
Of course, I'm going to say strategy.
Strategy.
But, everyone will have some luck here and there, but, over that period and with that number of exams, you can't get lucky 3 times.
And I do agree, exactly. Getting lucky 3 times, the probability of that is way lower than just being...
I won't go into, probability distributions that we study in level 1 or 2, but, it's...
No, having taught you the 3 levels, I'm aware of the strategy you followed, so it's certainly strategy. All right, so the final question, result day, chill or panic mode?
This has kind of always been me in results generally, chill. Because I know it's easy to say, but I suppose at that stage, there's nothing you can do to change what's happening. So I always try and think of it in that way that I can't change what's happened has happened. And so there's no point getting stressed about it. I know it's easier said than done, but...
Okay. All right. Okay, great. All right, Sultan, I think this is the final question. Do you have any last-minute advice for those who are sitting the CFA exam?
I just say very simply, don't give up. I know it's very difficult. There's a lot of content to learn. It can seem challenging. Like everyone will go through down periods. I did myself, but you'll get there in the end and it will be more than worth it.
Sultan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you with us. I'm sure your story will inspire many young CFA investment professionals. And I wish you all the best in your career. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much. It's
been
a pleasure.
Pleasure having you.